All right, good morning, everybody. I think we can go ahead and get going here. So welcome to our November meeting on a happy rainy day. Let's see, as always, these meetings are recorded, so please turn your camera on if you are asking questions or presenting. Otherwise, it's usually best to leave your camera off, and please make sure that we are all muted. So we have an agenda. Mina, can you pull? Thank you. So we'll go over the introductions and housekeeping. Pretty much same as always. We'll probably skip introductions since we're online and it takes a long time to kind of go through those. But I would like to make a call out. I think we started just asking if there's any new participants to the meeting that have not participated before. If so, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. Looks like we have 1, 2, 3. First person that popped up was John Spranza.
Yeah, hi, thanks. This is John Spranza. I work for HDR, but I also represent Sites Project Authority on their permitting side in working on the WISA components for the Prop 1. So I'm attending and listening. Thank you for the invite.
Great, welcome. And Alicia Hammond.
Hey there, I'm the executive director for Friends of the Eel River, and yeah, I'm just here to listen and learn. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. Sharna Gilmore.
Yeah, hi, Sharna Gilmore from the Scott River Watershed Council. I am also a first-time participant and here to learn, so thank you.
Lark Starkey, or Starkey Lark? Lark Starkey.
Yeah, Lark Starkey. Hi. Yeah, I'm Lark Starkey. I'm recently with Tetra Tech and also here just to kind of listen and learn and get to know your program.
And Robert Hawkins.
Hi, good morning. I'm also that mystery number that you see up there as well. I'm a program manager with the Department of Fish and Wildlife in Region 1. And I'm acting for Joe Croteau in the Klamath program now that he has retired. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to the discussion. I will have to leave a little early today, though. Nice to meet everyone.
Angelina Cook.
Hi, good morning. I'm Angelina Cook, and I work with the Upper Sacramento Regional Water Action Group and the Friends of the Shasta River. And I'm delighted to participate today. Thank you.
Great. And Valerie St. Mary.
Hi, I'm Valerie, and I'm a new analyst in Dan's unit at the Department of Water Rights. Filling Mina Chan's big shoes. Happy to participate this morning. Nice to meet you all.
Betsy Stapleton.
Hi, Betsy Stapleton, also with the Scott River Watershed Council, and interested in learning about this process. Thank you.
Cody Phillips.
Hi, everybody. Cody Phillips. I'm the policy analyst for California Coastkeeper Alliance, and I'm here just to, once again, listen and learn like everybody else. So thanks for having me.
Brittany Newby.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany. I work at the Water Board, the Division of Water Rights in the permitting section, and I'm glad to be here and meet some new faces. Thank you.
And Robert Pennington.
Hi, I'm Robert Pennington. I'm from the County of Sonoma. We're currently working on revisions to our well ordinance, including a process to consider impacts to navigable waters related to the public trust doctrine. So happy to be here to listen and learn.
Great. And is there anybody I missed? All right, hearing none. So as we move through our different agenda items and presentations, the easiest way to interject with any questions or comments you may have is either by raising your hand or by leaving a note in chat, and I'll make sure that I keep that open and monitor that as we go. So it looks like our first item today is an overview of the State Water Board and Department of Fish and Wildlife SEP implementation diagrams. These are something that we've been working on to try to help understand how SEP would fit into different regulatory or permitting processes of the different agencies. And I think I have the most recent version, not positive, but these are still draft. But we wanted to just kind of share kind of an overview of those today with you all. So let me see if I can get this to go to slideshow. Do you guys see the main screen or do you see the presenter screen?
Main screen, and those look like the most current ones, Dan.
Okay, good. So Brianna, are you on?
I am.
All right, do you want to go through
Organized.
the CDFW slides?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So my name is Brianna Drescher, and I am a supervisor in the in-stream flow program within the department's water branch. So we in the SEF tech team developed a number of flow charts, but this one specifically is to demonstrate where the department's in-stream flow program work exists within the SEF framework. Just as a note, our work is non-regulatory and we develop scientifically defensible flow criteria, which are protective of many ecological functions within a watershed and can be either focused on the watershed scale or include additional scientific studies to demonstrate species and life stage specific stream flow needs. Sorry, it's a mouthful. So as you can see in the flow chart that Dan has up right now, our program parallels the SEF sections A and B. Sorry, I keep looking off the side because I have it on my other screen and I'm looking at it while I'm speaking. So starting from the beginning, we select a priority stream. In our group, these priorities come from either legislative mandates, like the Public Resources Code or the Water Action Plan, or they can come from coordination with the department's regional staff and management based on their priorities. So we then work with our regional staff to identify the ecological management goals as defined in section A1. Staff will then evaluate any existing studies or data or other information to see what exists to inform our effort. And at the same time, we will also be putting together a watershed-wide evaluation, and we call those watershed criteria reports. And that includes utilization of the natural flows and functional flows tools that came out of the SEF process. And we do that in stream reaches and tributaries that our regional staff identified are of interest to them. So moving on, SEF sections A2 and A3 are not necessarily sequential, but essentially section A is completed prior to any work on a site-specific study in our program. In some cases, watershed criteria reports are sufficient to providing criteria that meets the identified ecological management goals. But in some situations, the management goals require more site and species specific information. And we would also, at the same time as we're producing the watershed criteria report, we would also be working on a study plan for that site specific component. And the study plan would outline our approach and describe the methods that we will use to develop the necessary species stream flow relationships as part of the site-specific work. So the in-stream flow program's process then falls into section B of the SEF framework. Here, the study plan is executed, data is collected, data analysis takes place. And that's a pretty long process. If any of you are aware with the in-stream flow program, these site-specific studies can take probably on average 3 years, but it could be more depending on stream conditions and what happens while we're out there. So and I've said this many times, but just to reiterate, like this, throughout this whole process, we actively coordinate with our regional staff. They provide an essential role as like the watershed and species experts when we're doing these site-specific studies, so that we're very informed by the information they provide. So in this case, so either the site-specific study or the watershed criteria report, they result in flow criteria, and that gets us through the section B of the SEF process. In some cases, we are directed by CDFW leadership to conduct the additional step of developing a flow recommendation or draft flow recommendations. This process is more involved and really extensive conversations take place between the in-stream flow program and the regional CDFW staff. And it also undergoes the highest level of review within the department. So they are quite an effort to put together. If we are developing a draft flow recommendation, we also include a public input component. And that helps us, we want to include stakeholder participation and considerations in this process. So that gives us the option for that. Either the resulting flow criteria or the recommendations can be used by the State Water Board in their process. So since we've reached the end of I'll hand it over to Dan, and he can talk about what happens next with the outline of the policy component of the SEF work.
Great, thank you, Brianna. And Angelina Cook, your hand is up. I'm not sure if that's a residual hand from introductions or if you have a question.
Sorry, that was residual.
Okay.
Did I?
So
Yeah, I lowered it. Did it lower?
Here. Yes, it did. No, it's still up. There it goes. Great. So now moving over to the State Water Board process here. The input kind of here is from an ecological flow prescription, either from CDFW or the Water Board would follow a similar process to what Brianna just laid out if we were developing our own flow criteria and ecological flow prescription, or it could also come from other stakeholders as well. So that's kind of where we pick up this slide here. So one of the first components that we would that we basically address is defining additional beneficial uses and management goals. These are looking at other beneficial uses of water outside of just in-stream flow uses. So these could be agriculture, municipal, rec, domestic, those types of different uses that we would also add into the equation at this point at the beginning. And then the next step is to develop tools and start to conduct an analysis to support basically the trade-offs between meeting different beneficial uses. So this is where we start to get into the balancing component of the State Water Board's duties. So we take what the in-stream flow uses are plus the other beneficial uses, and we try to analyze what the best, where we can achieve the most benefit of applying all those uses across, thinking of the public trust in general for the state. And out of that comes a development of flow alternatives. And at this point, we conduct our scientific impact analysis on those different flow alternatives. So how well the different beneficial uses are being met and what the impacts of those beneficial uses not being met or being met are. So both a benefit and a negative. We typically, at this point, draft a scientific basis report and start to kick off the CEQA process at this point. And this kind of falls in with section C10 of the SEF document. The next step is we start to, go out and present to the public and stakeholders and receive comments and hold workshops and develop, once we kind of have the different flow alternatives, then we develop implementation and adaptive management plans, performance measures, and monitoring requirements. This lines up with C11 and C12 in SEF. And then we release a draft policy with the flow objectives, which would be our recommended flow alternative, is what you would find in there with the flow objective. And I should mention that here we kind of focused in on the policy, but a regulation and a policy are very similar for the State Water Board, so it could also be as a regulation. And then have comments from stakeholders and workshops, and then bring the final policy and flow objectives with the compliance plan to the board for approval, and then it goes to OAL for final approval, Office of Administrative Law for final approval after the board adopts it. And so the final outcome would be similar to the environmental flow recommendation. So does anybody have any questions on these flow charts? We plan to finalize these, and we're working on some additional ones I should add that kind of go through some other permitting components, but they're just not quite right yet.
It's Conrad. Can I chime in, Dan?
Yeah.
Yeah, just for everyone else's benefit, the Endangered Species Act is written such that if you determine the quantity of water necessary to avoid extinction, it is not subject to portion C that Dan just described. So this might be something we're settling. That's all. I've said it many times. I'm not sure everyone believes me, but it's true, and it's something we need to consider.
Yeah, and yes, that's been heard. I just follow what my legal tells me to do. So you've had conversations with our legal department, Conrad, so you can continue those. But you know, I'm just the staff implementing what they recommend we do.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Dan, there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you. So the first question is, are CDFW final flow recommendations submitted to the State Water Board, and are the recommendations peer reviewed? Brianna, do you want to handle that one, or would you like me to?
Yeah, I was just waiting to see if you wanted to call on me or how that was going to work. So the final flow recommendations will be made publicly available in the case that we conduct or produce them. Yeah, I mean, that could be considered a submittal to the State Water Board, and the recommendations themselves are not peer reviewed, but the criteria that they are based on are peer reviewed. I mean, they do go through an extensive internal review within the department, and you know, we consider the staff that are working on these to be experts in their fields. So they do undergo a lot of scrutiny and discussion, and we are trying, you know, our efforts are to put out the most scientifically defensible products that we can.
And let's see, Kimberly had a question. Has the idea of e-flows changed over time? I thought originally the ability to know the flow criteria or minimum flows needed for the environment could be determined more quickly. I don't know so much it's changed over time. It kind of rests in a ability for it to hold up in the court system. You know, often there's challenges to the flow criteria, the flow objectives that might be developed and set. But a big part of SEF is to help standardize and improve the timelines to develop the flow criteria. So that's a big piece of what we're trying to accomplish here, along with this this working group. And I don't know, Kimberly, did that answer your question or?
Yeah, no, thank you, Daniel. I appreciate that these have to be very, very scientifically done. And so I just, it's a little frustration on my part because I've been wanting to get a flow criteria for Green Valley Creek for a while, and I just cannot figure out how to break the logjam. And it would be nice to have something like that to sort of inform decision makers. And, you know, like Robert said, we're doing a well ordinance over here, and I don't think our creeks are protected from groundwater pumping, and we don't really know what to tell staff, and we need that information. So this is my, you know, my little pet peeve. But I think that we've got some great information. We just got to like figure out how to get it out there. Thank you so much, Daniel.
You're welcome. And Conrad.
what Kimberly just described is essentially happening under marijuana regs. So it doesn't have to be that hard if the politics align. And with setting in-stream flow requirements that are only binding on marijuana cultivation, it was quite easy to come up with recommendations.
Yes, we did. And in that situation, we have our interim requirements were adopted by the board in 2017 and updated in 2019. We're currently working on developing long-term flow requirements for the North Coast policy area, which will look a little bit more holistically year-round and be a little bit more balanced. We did adopt the current requirements that the cannabis policy adopted would be considered relatively strict, and it's kind of a statewide application, so it's not location specific or region specific is what we're looking at. Any other questions?
Hello?
Yes.
You sort of recognized earlier when it seemed like I'm hiding behind I'm on the call anyway, and I'm a contractor for Institute for Fisheries Resource to the Pacific Federation of Fishermen's Associations. So my question has to do with one earlier with focusing regulations and similar environmental flows that are required for other beneficial uses and trying to reach that balance. And you mentioned several of them, ag and other stuff. And I didn't notice one that is important to us is the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act of 1972 that Governor Reagan signed into law that has a list of beneficial uses, including fisheries, recreation, aesthetic values, and other stuff that has to be included in an analysis of what a beneficial use is and how to fit it into the other uses. And I didn't see that mentioned, and I think it's important that you do.
Yes, that is correct. That is part of the process. We look at, I just had listed off a few of them that came to the top of my head, but it would be all beneficial uses of water in the state, either identified in the regional board's basin plan or in the situation, the Wild and Scenic Rivers, or whatever other statutes or other plans identify those. So tribal as well. But there's a number of different beneficial uses, and we'd roll those out as part of our outreach effort and ask for any comments of ones that we might be missing as well at that point.
All right, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. All right, any other questions on this agenda item? All right, hearing none, I'll go ahead and stop sharing. Okay, so our next item is an update on the CABW training with Chris.
Hi everyone. I'm Chris Taniguchi Kwan. I'm a senior scientist at SCWRP, also on the CEF technical team. So the CEF tech team, we led a half-day workshop on CEF at the annual California Bioassessment Workgroup and the California Society of Freshwater Sciences meeting. This was held at Cal EPA in Sacramento on October 10th. We had a nice mix of participants from various sectors, including people from state and regional agencies, public utilities, NGOs, tribal communities, private firms, and academia. And during the workshop, we gave an overview of CEF, presentations on the functional flow metric modeling statewide, some of the CEF applications, including CDFW's in-stream flow program and the South Orange County case study. We also gave demonstrations of some of the CEF tools that were developed through this effort, including the natural flows database and the functional flows calculator R package. And then we ended on talking about next steps and kind of the future of this effort. I do want to note that during the R package demo, some people were having trouble accessing or downloading the R package from their laptops. This could be from specific versions of R they're using, potential firewalls or other reasons. So we're currently troubleshooting and resolving some of those issues, but we're going to be following up with the group on additional resources as they become available. It also is really nice to hear from some of the participants on how they're using Ceph right now for a variety of different applications across the state. We're going to be inviting some of the participants to give an update to this group on how they're using Ceph. So hopefully at the next eFlows workgroup meeting, we'll have a couple of presentations on that. We're also encouraging any of you all that are on the call who are using Ceph to give an update to this work group. So we'd love to hear from you. And so I think Dan's going to be talking about that at the end of this meeting. And so all of our workshop presentations are posted on the Ceph website, ceph.ucdavis.edu/presentations. So we have all the PDFs of those presentations. We also have a live recording of the workshop presentations. So once those are available to the tech team, we're going to be posting them on the website under presentations as well. So keep a lookout for that. So any questions?
All right, great. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so next on our agenda is a update from Sarah on report templates for case studies with a focus on the Little Shasta River.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I am Sarah Yarnell from University of California, Davis, and a member of the tech team. I'm going to try to share my screen here.
We
Do
can
you see it
it.
in, okay, in presentation mode?
No, it's not presentation mode yet. It's still
Okay,
in standard PowerPoint.
Yeah, let me try again.
If you share it first and then go to presentation mode, it'll pop up typically correct.
Put it in presentation mode first and then
No,
share?
share first and then.
Okay, that's what I tried.
Mode.
Yeah, hold on. Okay, so now I'm sharing it and then I'm going to put it in presentation mode, but you don't see the presentation mode.
Not yet.
Let me try a different way then. Sorry, all. I'm wondering if I can share it and then if that allows me to. Here we go. What about that?
That's good.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. I am not the most proficient with Teams despite all of our time on Teams. Okay, great. So yeah, I wanted to just provide a brief overview and kind of update on some of the case studies that have been ongoing for the last year or so. So we have a series of various funded case studies that various members of the Ceph technical team plus some of the agency folks have been involved in. A handful of them are listed here. In particular, the three highlighted in red, Lower Aliso Creek, the Lower Casumas River, and the Little Shasta River, have been completed. And there are case study reports available on the Ceph website under case studies. There's sort of a screenshot here. There'll be a brief, if you go to that page, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but if you go to the page, there'll be a brief description of each one of those case studies. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you can download the technical reports for each of those case studies. And what we've done is we've set up a template and sort of a format for how you could report the case studies where you step through each of the steps of Ceph, starting with step 1, initially giving some background on Ceph and functional flows, and then stepping through the results for that case study for each of the steps 1 through 12 that are there. We will have a case study template document that's essentially a Word document that we use to upload and create these template reports. And we will be posting that on the website too. And so anybody else who's doing a Ceph case study or application could use this template as well for their case study. And then if you send it over to us, I'm happy to get it posted. And the idea is hopefully over time, we can kind of build a library of these applications of SEF throughout the state with various data that can be shared in a more standardized format. So I just wanted to walk through and give an update on the outputs and outcomes, particularly of the Little Shasta, now that that one's been completed. As a reminder, these 3 case studies were also, the results of them were published in 2 articles. I think those of you who have been around have seen this, but just as a reminder, this publication here was led by Chris, and all of these are available in the in Frontiers in Environmental Science with the links here. These are available open access online. This particular paper discusses that application on Lower Aliso Creek, and this is the same case study presentation that Chris provided in the workshop. So the PDF of her presentation is available on the SEF website under presentations as well. And then this paper talks about essentially how we have been thinking about applying SEF and groundwater influence streams. And so this is for both includes both the Lower Cosumnes data and information from the Little Shasta. And so again, both those papers are available, and you can find them, links to them on the SEF website as well under resources. So just to give a quick update and overview of the outcomes for the Little Shasta in particular, because there were some actions about that technical report is now posted as well. So like the Lower Cosumnes, we only predominantly focused on sections A and B of going through and assessing the Little Shasta. In particular, we were interested in looking at the section A criteria for the Little Shasta. What do the modeled functional flow metrics look like? How is groundwater? We know that this is the Little Shasta in particular has several discrete springs and it is a predominantly groundwater influence system. We looked at how well section A criteria evaluated that. And then we looked at a couple questions regarding channel morphology. Is the channel incised in certain locations? An assessment of that. And then looking at stream water quality in particular, there's a pretty big difference in the quality of water that comes out of the discrete springs for ecological purposes versus surface runoff or agricultural return drainage. And then we discussed some potential management actions. So again, the details of both the Lower Cosumnes and the Little Shasta case study are provided on the SEF website in those technical reports that you can download. So I wanted to just highlight a couple of the outcomes and a couple of the interesting things we found by going through this case study on the Little Shasta in particular. So this is a outline of the Little Shasta watershed where the river essentially drains from right to left across your stream, or essentially to the north, and meets up with the main stem Shasta River over here on the left. And we picked 3 locations of interest, one at the base of the essentially the foothills reach where the river starts to come out of the mountains, and 2 locations down in the valley where there are a lot of groundwater dependent ecosystems, grazing. Historically, this area was pretty extensive wetlands and now provides, like I said, riparian wetland areas as well as locations for grazing. And one of the interesting things we found looking into this that is something that we wanted to highlight for this group is that the functional flow metric modeling that was done, which there is a summary of that effort, is provided by Ted Grantham in one of the presentations from the workshop, is that modeling that we've done statewide works really well, but it is based on the NHD layer, the National Hydrography Dataset layer for the state. And so in some places, if that National Hydrography Dataset is inaccurately delineated, then there is a potential that the functional flow metrics coming out of Section A could be also incorrectly calculated. And we found this to be the case in the Little Shasta. So this figure here shows, if you were to look at the National Hydrography Dataset, this entire black outline has been delineated as the watershed for the Little Shasta. But essentially what this entire lower section is this is Lake Shastina, and then this is the Montague Canal that comes across, flows to the north, and crosses over and actually bypasses the main stem of the Little Shasta and continues to carry water to the north. But the way that it's routed in the National Hydrography Dataset, it's actually routed as if it meets the Little Shasta River, and that water is added to the downstream sections. So when we looked at the individual functional flow metrics that were predicted for the upper basin of the Little Shasta, all of these metrics up here and data were correctly calculated and the delineation was correct. But where you hit the Montague Canal crossing the river, all of the downstream locations then were incorrectly predicted because they were accounting for all of this watershed area and drainage that actually doesn't really contribute to the river. So we set about a process of trying to essentially redelineate the watershed and hopefully recalculate then the functional flow metrics for the lower basin based on this corrected watershed delineation. After a very long involved process, which is summarized in Appendix A in that technical report, we basically realized that it's pretty difficult to essentially completely recalculate all the functional flow metrics for these small discrete subsections of the state when you're dealing with databases that essentially include every stream reach in the state. And so this is something that we'll want to, as a technical working group here, our environmental flows working group, we might want to give some consideration and talk about how we best can go about dealing with these locations where the NHD layer is incorrectly delineated. So this is something for further discussion. But it was a good process to sort of discover these issues and try to work through them as best as we can. And at least now we have some steps forward on some things that we can talk about in the future. So what we did then with the remainder of the Little Shasta is we did focus on this upstream LOI 3, where we know that the watershed delineation is correct, the predicted functional flow metrics, they matched really nicely with a historic reference gauge and historic data that was in the area. That gauge was not included as a reference gauge for any of the statewide predicted metrics. So it was a nice calibration to give us confidence in the Section A criteria that were coming out. One of the interesting things is that there are a handful of springs that we know are discrete springs in the area. And what was interesting is when we looked at the functional flow metric predictions compared to the observed data, they matched up really nicely, but these springs have been diverted for well over 100 years. So they essentially weren't taken into account in those functional flow metric predictions. So we went through that process of adding, essentially, particularly for this location 3 of interest, to add 10 CFS to our to the base flow metric predictions that we would for our ecological flow criteria coming out of Section A. And again, all of this is detailed in both actually the published paper and the technical report. We did go through Section B, looking at potential effects of channel incision and water quality. We found that there was, this is again also delineated in the technical report in more detail. There's very modest incision in the bottomlands, but not enough to really limit a 2-year flood getting at least partially out onto the floodplain. But this is something we'd want to monitor. So we made no adjustments to the metrics. We were able to sort of assess that throughout the watershed. So future efforts can take that data into account, as well as in that upper location of interest. And again, the water quality is really great if you're using the spring flow. There can be some concerns with warmer, poorer quality water from the agricultural runoff in some locations. And so again, we did not make any adjustments to the ecological flow criteria, assuming that that spring flow could be maintained within the stream. So the outcome then of the report was to, for sections A and B, was to look at these. These were the natural functional flow metrics that came out of the natural flows database here in the left column, and we simply updated them by adding essentially 10 CFS to the base flow to account for that historic Cold Springs contribution that would have historically been there. And these ended up being then good ecological flow criteria for the upper Little Shasta. So just kind of wrapping up, the case study really was great in that it highlighted places where we have good confidence in the data and the predictions, particularly in the upper basin where the NHD delineation was correct. It highlighted these potential issues you can have when the NHD layer is not correct. But we could, and there was a couple options for moving forward in the Little Shasta. We could estimate ecological flow criteria based on these upper basin estimates. But I think it probably would be better off. Folks would have more confidence, and stakeholders might have more confidence if they actually did use a local hydrologic model that could account for those local groundwater influences in the lower basin. So that might be something to consider. And we did sort of unfortunately learn that it's really difficult to rerun those functional flow metric predictions for really small discrete areas when you're dealing with huge, large statewide data sets. But that section B was also really helpful for highlighting these local considerations regarding channel incision and water quality. So I'll just wrap up there and take any questions that folks might have. And yeah, and again, I just suggest if you're interested in more details to please go to the, sorry, how do I stop sharing? There we go. To please go to the technical report and or the published paper for more information. Okay, great. Any questions?
Looks like Norman Johns has his hand up.
Hi, Sarah. That was very, very interesting. What was the impetus for this study? Who were the sponsors?
Oh, right. Thank you for that. Yeah, this was funded by the Wildlife Conservation Board. And actually, this was a proposal that several members of the SEF technical team put in a little over 2 years ago now, when we were first getting SEF running as a case study application for SEF. And so Wildlife Conservation Board funded both looking at Little Shasta as well as South Orange County, the Lower Aliso Creek study that Chris led.
Thank you.
And so, yeah, and just so that the goal was for us to not only apply these case studies, but to help provide the eFlows technical working group with examples of how you could work through SEF. So these technical reports, a big goal of ours was to set these up in a way with a case study template, so that it should try to really make it more clear for how we could apply this, and providing a template that others could follow.
The other thing that was interesting about your study is that it basically points out that water quality, I guess, can be one of those site-specific considerations, whereas I always thought those were, going to be limited to things like site, channel morphology changes and so on. But clearly, this is a good example that's broader.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And typically we tend to think about water quality sort of in two ways. We think about the temperature aspects. And so, for example, if you were looking at a stream below a dam, if the water is potentially much colder than natural, or if it's a top flow and the water is much warmer than natural, we should be thinking about whether or not that needs to change the ecological flow criteria recommendations. Do you need more water, for example, if the water is very warm? That's a common situation in the Central Valley, right, that people look at. But in this case, the springs provide a lot of nutrient-rich water, nutrients in a good way, not nutrients in a bad way, right? Nutrients can be good or they can be bad, depending on what nutrients you're talking about. And in the case of the Little Shasta, there's a lot of good quality, not only cold water coming out of the springs, but also beneficial nutrient water coming out of the springs. So there's a lot of benefit to, if you're going to put flow back in the stream, that spring water has really high ecological quality compared to maybe some of the other surface runoff. And you might consider and do some analysis about whether you might actually be able to, get by and use, is 10 CFS of spring water perhaps better or as good as, say, 20 CFS of warmer surface runoff, for example. So some of those types of trade-off considerations could be considered in places like that. Thanks for the question.
And Nick Joslin.
Hi, thanks for that update. I read over the newest report you put out, a lot more information added to it. I appreciate that. I grew up swimming in what I was led to believe was a ditch as a kid. And it wasn't until I got the geology degree that I realized that was the Little Shasta River. So I'm really familiar with the area. I had missed that the Montague Canal had been mistakenly added. Thanks for pointing that out. That's kind of, I don't know, that strikes me as, I don't know, maybe the team not asking for local knowledge or something, because I think you asked anybody out on the ground, they would have told you that canal passes past the river without going into it.
Right. So I'm happy to explain a little bit more about that. It's not that the team missed it. It's that when you take a statewide modeling effort.
Gotcha. No, right? I get that. But I mean,
and it's based on the NHD, right? And then you get out there and you start looking at what the metrics are popping up. And that's how we realized it. We were like, wait a minute, how does the flow all of a sudden go from a predicted flow of 10 to 15 CFS of base flow at the upper location, jump to 120 when you get down to the lower. Like, where did all this water come from?
I get it. That's the difference between working behind a computer and going out onto the ground and asking people who live there. So I'm curious why you sort of stop the analysis at like the Martins. They were our neighbors. Up above there, the headwaters, the river's degraded immediately, free range cattle. There's been efforts to fence. They were funded by the RCD. The fence was put up one time. The cows are in the headwater spring of the Little Shasta every summer, degrading it. You need to go way above the Martins. Then you have the top water right holder, Batchagalupi, who is like abusing every spring that comes out of the hillside and appropriates, whether legally or not, all of that water as well. So that there's something missing too by stopping right at Table Rock. There's a whole national forest component to water quality, cattle, logging, sediment. I'm just curious why it kind of stops there. I appreciate the 3 sections you have broken down into. I think there's a 4th one high in the watershed that's just being not considered.
Yeah, so for the purposes of the study, we picked the three sort of most geomorphically representative reaches. The next, again, this is sort of considered like a phase one, I know, of the Little Shasta, the work that's going on there. And really this is, the next steps would be to do more analysis with the community members. We did not go into section C. This was an initial framework based on the information that we had at hand in the studies there. So I do know that folks are going to be continuing to try to build on this work. And again, when you have about a year and a half to pull together data, you do what you can and you meet that deadline, and then you're set up to continue to do more work. And so I know that Nature Conservancy and other landowners in the area are really eager and looking forward to continuing that work. So I think these are all great discussions that the stakeholders in the community should have as they continue to move forward with really trying to get it established and come to an agreement on how best to improve the system up there.
What is the process when you have mostly unwilling landowners? How do we address that? I mean, that's the biggest thing that I keep pointing out over and over, is that many of them are unwilling. You're talking about Blair Hart, maybe the Martins, willing. No one else is.
Yeah, these are great questions for my colleagues who work up there and know the area much better than I do. And I encourage, I think encourage people to talk more. And I'm probably the least familiar person on the team with that area, having only visited once. But others, on the report, other folks that I work with, folks at TNC, would be in a much better position to have a longer discussion about that and answer those questions. So I encourage reaching out to them.
I have. They apparently don't like when locals bring up problems with their work. And, while you continue these,
yeah.
I'm sure you can, but that's the reality. When you know a stream and want to see harm undone, it's painful, even as a scientist, to watch science just essentially, state that the system is degraded and has been historically abused, and nothing happens. Nothing comes out of it. And I know that's the handoff to the water board and to stakeholders. So I don't expect you to have a comment about it. It's just that I am engaged with cow trout and Nature Conservancy, but it's tedious. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments.
Thank you, Nick. Angelina.
Hi. I am curious if the case study has an estimate of original flows prior to modifying the wetland for grazing. And I'm also assuming that these case study areas are good candidates for recommending formal recommendations of minimum in-stream flows. And I'm wondering if this is part of the goal for this case study, or what is the process from turning this from a case study to a formal recommendation of minimum in-stream flows?
Okay, so let me answer the first question first, which is the historical flows. There's very little historical data. In fact, that plot that I showed is of the springs comes from one of the older, early, 100-year-old water master reports up there. There is that historic USGS gauge, which we looked at that data. That's after the springs had been appropriated. So that's a good estimation of surface runoff, but doesn't take into account the springs, and that's discussed in the technical report. And then really the next best estimation that we are aware of is the modeling efforts, right, that have been done statewide. And those, after some analysis, again, discussed in the technical report, seem to have a good estimation of the type of hydrology that's up there. But of course, that modeling then was inaccurate for the lower part of the basin. So if you're considering down below the Montague Canal right now, then there's probably not good historic information that I'm aware of. So that's a good place for continued development of perhaps a hydrologic model that takes into account groundwater influences, right? Because that was a big historic wetland. So it would be a pretty complicated effort, and you'd want to make sure you were doing coupled surface groundwater modeling there, which I think the board and some other folks are working on. Regarding the second question, I think any of these case studies are good data to help support local community members and or agencies develop the environmental flow, the ecological flow recommendations that could go forward to the board. And that was our hope in initiating this case study, is that we're sort of giving a lift up and trying to summarize the data that we know is available so that can be picked up and used by agencies and other community members out there for just those purposes, just those processes and purposes.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Conrad.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. To the last question about whether the ultimate goal is to make an in-stream flow recommendation that can become in-stream flow, I think a lot of it has to do with what the question is at the outset. So ultimately, what the Water Board has been saying over decades is that they need a recommendation that is based on the management objectives of existing law. So I guess my question is, for this study or others you know of, is the CEF trying to have the principal question be how much water is needed to achieve management goals of existing laws, or is it something else?
The objective of CEF, in my opinion, is, and others from the tech team, please feel free to weigh in, is to help guide the environmental flow process. And there are so many methods out there, as we know, in terms of how to determine environmental flows. And with different agencies following different processes and different stakeholders following different processes, it's very easy to get tangled up in just differing methods and differing details of differing methods. So our hope with CEF is to provide a more consistent framework and transparent framework for those discussions. And then, of course, how that information gets used in terms of moving forward with regulatory processes. I think everybody here will tell you that our hope is that it's helpful and that it does help with those regulatory processes. Dan or Eric or others, I don't know if you want to add in and weigh in on that as well.
So the Shasta River is one of the 5 priority rivers identified in the California Water Action Plan activity. So the information that has come from this study has been, Sarah submitted that to the board. That's information that we will consider as we move forward developing flow objectives for the Shasta River, along with additional information from CDFW. It doesn't have to come from CDFW. We can take information from other sources such as this effort to help inform the development of those flow objectives. Ultimately, it's really just a resource balance. We have very limited staff to work on developing, policies and regulations to implement in-stream flow requirements, and we're doing the best that we can with the resources we have available. So when Shasta actually comes up, as far as moving down that process, it's like we said, there's five streams, 1 unit, 6 staff working on it. And so that's the biggest limitation at the board's side.
There's not time, but I'll just repeat my question for future meetings. The question is, at the very beginning of the study, are you determining how much water needed to achieve management objectives of existing law? And we can't talk more about it, but you talked about process and policy. The California Water Action Plan specifically says, figure out how much water is needed to achieve 5937 flows and public trust flows. So that's kind of where I'm going with that, but we can move on.
Yeah, and again, Conrad, that's just, we're staff, we implement how we go down the process the board directs us to go down. Nick?
Question for you, Dan. I know these are the earliest examples working through this whole process. And I think Little Shasta maybe has some issues, but if you were to say now decide, let's grade this on how legally defensible we could consider this exercise, how would you feel about the Little Shasta framework that's now in this report?
I have the email and the report open on my desktop, but I have not read it. So that's where I'm at with that response. So I can't answer it at this point.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, any other questions? Comments?
Oh, it looks like Dan Metten just had a comment in the chat. How far off were flow estimates based off of these issues with the NHD and spring fed. So that is detailed in the technical report. Essentially with the springs, it was really pretty close just without the spring contributions. We literally just added 10 CFS to the upper location of interest 3, and in order to account for those springs. So it was good to see that those were coming out well. And then the issues with the NHD, like I kind of responded to in Nick's comment, essentially as you're clicking on each COM ID in the natural flows database, you can see where it jumps. There's like right above the canal, the COM ID right above the canal has something like, 10 to 20, CFS base flow. And then the next COM ID right below the canal, it jumps up by an order of magnitude. So even those of us who are not as familiar with the watershed could tell that something was wrong there just by clicking on those COM IDs. So those are the types of things that, just by being careful and diligent, and then of course, everybody who knows the system and knows their local area would see that there was an error there in the underlying framework for the modeling. So it was about an order of magnitude. Okay, thanks for the questions.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
All right, so we're running a little bit long, but I do want to, we also shortened the meeting by an hour than typical, so it's okay. But I wanted to give an opportunity to open it up to any updates that anybody might have or questions for anyone.
Hello?
Yes?
I have a question. Just discussed. Is
Go
there any in your reports to whoever about the need for more money from the legislature, approved, amending, whatever, to get the staff and all that needed to complete an answer to these questions that you're not the only ones that are limited by staff doing this. A lot of different meetings about all these issues. And it seems to be a recurring theme without any solution that seems apparent to us. So why not recommend that the legislature shape up and give you guys more money to do your job with so much at stake?
Yeah, so state agencies go through a standard process. It's called a budget change process to request additional staff to work on different types of activities. Some of those are initiated by legislation. Others are just areas where we feel that we're short-staffed and could use additional staff. It's a confidential process until the budget comes out, which is typically in January. It's the first time that the public starts to see what those requests by the different agencies are. But it goes through the Department of Finance and then also through the governor's office as well for approval of those resources. So that's kind of the standard process. The second one is that through adopting legislation, those just staff can be automatically, added to a different department. So those are kind of the two different ways that staff kind of get allocated. As with anything, it's a question of funding and where that funding comes from in order to fund any additional resources that would be requested. Does that kind of help answer your question? So it's
yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome. And it looks like we have a question from Kimberly in the chat. Is there a study or two that discuss the ability of, sorry, just got jumped on me. Is there a study or two that discuss the ability of native fish to survive drought when there are few, if any, diversions or groundwater pumping? I am not aware of any. I would open that up to the group if you're aware of any studies just on more streams that are less impacted and impacts of low flows on salmonid survival.
It's going to depend if it's a runoff stream or a spring-fed stream.
If anybody has any good studies that they'd like to share with the group, you can go ahead and I'll drop my email in the chat. You can go ahead and send it to me, and we'll send it out to the group. I'm reading through a longer question here from Nick. I'm assuming this is related to the Little Shasta, and just more of a point than a question. So everybody can go ahead and read that in the chat. Conrad has another point in the chat. That's more of a comment than a question.
People on the phone can't see.
Oh, okay. Let me read it then. From Nick, at a certain point, we have to be willing to admit this is not a great example to use as a case study and question whether throwing more taxpayer money at the Little Shasta River is worth it. Caltrout is sitting on $600,000 to keep studying the watershed when we know it is and has been abused for 180 years by agriculture. I don't think this watershed has anything else going for it other than big players, TNC and Caltrout, leading a rally call because they have one willing landowner, Blair Hart, who allows access. The Little Shasta dries up every summer because of agriculture. Fish used to be plentiful. And then Conrad's comment is money is not the barrier to in-stream flow recommendations that can become requirements. Political will is the barrier. And I think that's most of the comments here. Any other comments or questions at this point? Okay, we'll go ahead and wrap up the meeting then. One of the items though that I really wanted to highlight and focus, and I see a hand up and I'll get to that in just a second, was that we would like and think it's very beneficial for this group if others that are working on any in-stream flow work, development, or anything else could come present to the group on some of the stuff that they're working on as well. So really wanted to open that up and make a call for that for our next meeting and ongoing meetings, that this is a platform for us to share what everybody's working on. It doesn't have to be SEP related. If you're trying to fit it in within the SEP framework, that's great. But even if it's outside of the SEP framework, we'd still love to hear about it and hear what you all are working on. So if you have any projects you're working on and would like to present, a couple minutes to 15 minutes or whatever, please let me know. I'm going to drop my email in the chat here so everybody has it. Yeah, so just wanted to really put out that call there for everybody. And let's see, question from Carol.
Hi, so I switched roles at my agency and started doing government relations from a technical position, but thinking about some of the questions that people have had with the legislature. I come from Zone 7 Water Agency, which is very highly dependent on the State Water Project to provide water to us. So the concept of, all of the challenges with trying to understand in-stream flows and, where you're going to need to do curtailments during a drought and how we move water around is really important to my agency. And I want to try and figure out what are the things that we can do as an agency to help understand what's going on with the fisheries, but also are there things that maybe I can do as, a water agency that's going to help to facilitate discussions with the legislatures on what to do with this, how do we move things along? And so all of this has been very educational for me. So I appreciate that you guys have invited me and that I'm able to participate. But as a water agency, I'm also wondering, what can I do to help? So you can noodle that. I don't need an answer immediately, but that's something that I think if more water agencies were participating, maybe we could, I mean, it's a melee, right? The Delta conveyance and everything has been a long discussion for many years. But if we can come to the table, maybe as staff, that'll help some of our boards and upper management make better decisions from a scientific perspective.
Thank you, Carol.
Good idea.
And I think that's hopefully part of this space is to try to help facilitate those types of conversations. And that might be a really good, we've talked a little bit about trying to create some subgroups and some other type working, groups. And that might be a really good one, is how do we move forward in a, what I typically call kind of like the local cooperative solution space, or the voluntary agreement space of managing our water at the local level. That might be a really good, which is part of Section C of SEF. And that might be a nice kind of work group and space to kind of move into. Thank you.
So I have an idea for you.
Yes.
A suggestion on how to answer that issue, that question that was just raised, and that is to apply the applicable law. And that is, with the Endangered Species Act, go to Section 2 about definitions of what habitat is, for example, and then look at the criteria for listing in Section 4, species of concern, or to unlist it. And that depends on 5 things: range and habitat, utilization or overutilization for commercial or scientific or other purposes that are jeopardizing the stock or its habitat, the likelihood of increased predation or disease, number 3. Number 4, the inadequacy or adequacy of existing regulations to protect that stock and its habitat. And the last is the other natural and man-made factors affecting its continued existence. That's number 5. And once you do that assessment, then recovery plan, it's also listed in the essay, I can't remember what section it's in right now, is in order. And recovery means protecting what's left, applying those habitat features, gravel, watershed, ground cover, streamside vegetation, still for that stock to exist and prosper. So harvestable surplus over and above the listing populations levels. And then we can fix for those stocks again once you get an establishment of that problem, and then a bodies or whatever to get them to fix the problems, okay, 1 through 5, and then you have it done. But if you don't do that, then you're going to be playing touch football against a team of people that is suited up and willing to play tackle against you on the same field of play. And 2 things happen as a result. That is, you get hurt real bad and you lose. And it seems to me that we're spending a lot of money getting hurt and losing, and we got to reverse this, especially now in this extended drought period, regardless of who wins whatever election coming up. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your comment. Any other comments or questions at this point? All right, I'm hearing none, so we can go ahead and call it a meeting. I want to thank everybody for attending today. As always, it's great to have all of your participation and points of view and everything else. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks,
Dan.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Dan.
Bye, Sarah.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.